The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this masterclass conducted by Wilna Lindemann, Head of Finance Systems at FrieslandCampina Corporate Center. We're very proud to have her here. I think one of our leading customers, and I think in particular what interested us about the project that Wilna has done at FrieslandCampina is her end-to-end vision of how to set up a fully agile reporting, let's say, ecosystem. You know, in a sense, from the raw data to a harmonized, trusted, shared, and also efficient output at the other end, and not just look at the reporting layer. And this is very much in our philosophy, where we're less interested in the aspect of another tool, but more in how we are the means to an end, where we contribute to finance transformations, agile reporting, processes. And I think Wilna has a great example to share with us today. Thank you very much for those of you that already submitted questions. Some of those will, we think, be answered by Wilna's presentations, but we'll also have the opportunity at the end of this webinar to answer those questions more explicitly. And to those of you that have questions during the masterclass, please enter them, type them into the questions box in your GoToMeeting interface. You can expand that section and then just type in your questions. We will collect those, and then at the end of the webinar, we will go through those, and Wilna and ourselves will be able to answer those in detail. So thank you very much, and without further ado, I hand over to Wilna.
So thank you, Hugo. Thank you all for joining this session, where I will be trying to share with you some of the building blocks that we are trying to apply in our process to create efficient or effective performance reporting. Let's start right away, and like Hugo said, any questions that you may still have at the end of this session, I'll be more than happy to answer those. So let's start with our organizations. In general, our organizations have ambitions, so they set goals for themselves. We have people working in our organizations to achieve those goals, and we're executing processes to try and get to the desired outcome. Now, if we have ambitions, we want to make sure that we are able to achieve those ambitions. So first of all, we need to define what it is that we want to achieve. Then we want to measure whether what we have defined we wanted to achieve is actually achieved, and then we want to report out on the things that we want to measure. Now, looking at FrieslandCampina, our purpose is to nourish by nature. We take a natural product that we use to nourish millions of consumers around the world on a daily basis. And what we've achieved so far is, in 2015, 11.3 billion euro in total revenue, and we've been able to achieve that with 21,000 employees around the world, mostly in Europe and in Asia, but also in North and South America and Africa and the Middle East. We are located in 32 locations around the world, but we are actually selling our products in more than 100 countries. So that's what we've achieved so far, but of course as a company we have our own ambitions. So we aspire to grow our volumes every year with 5%. We would also like to process and valorize around 10 billion kilograms of milk from our member dairy farmers on an annual basis. We would like to grow our revenue to 15 billion euro in the year 2020. And in the longer term, we strive to be a financially healthy company in harmony with nature and society, not only in the short term, but in 20 years from now to also create value for future dairy farmer generations. So those are our ambitions. And of course, we want to know whether we are on track with the ambitions that we've set ourselves. So are we really on track? To check whether we are on track, we have certain requirements from our systems. So first of all, we would like our systems to tell us what is going on in our key processes. We also want to provide insights in case something needs changing. So we've set a strategy and we have ambitions. If we're not really achieving that and we want to make a change, we want to have insights in where we need to make that change. And finally, we want to ensure that what needs to be changed really gets applied in the operational processes. So that then creates requirements or prerequisites for effective strategic performance reporting. So there's a couple of building blocks that we are trying to apply in practice to create effective reporting solutions. We start with defining key master data elements, the master data elements that we want to measure based on the strategy and the ambitions that we've set for ourselves. And we also want to make sure that we harmonize those values, that everybody is using the same values. Secondly, we want to apply a structure and some governance on the reporting processes. So we want to provide a structure to our users and rules on how we want people to report on these key master data elements that we feel are important to measure for ourselves. Then we want to make sure that the master data elements that we've defined and the structure and governance that we have applied is actually put to practice. So what we want is to assign and demand ownership for all our processes and the data elements, making sure that through the course of time those key master data elements and the structures and governance are maintained. And finally, to actually be able to read the results, we would like to get to agile reporting solutions. We want to implement them and we want to make sure that people are using them and using them in the right way. And those agile reporting solutions should then give us information, and in case anything needs to be changed, we can then go back at the starting point of defining and harmonizing our key master data elements that we want to measure in support of achieving our strategy and ambitions. So let's start at the first building block. Defining and harmonizing key master data elements. Master data controls means, first of all, that we need to define what key values we want to measure. We want to make sure that across our organization everybody is using the same harmonized values, and also through the course of time we want to check that people continue to use these agreed and harmonized defined key master data values or elements. Why is that important? If we've defined our master data content and we're combining that with harmonization and actually measuring what key master data elements are being used in the process, that gives us the biggest chance of creating insight. If we fail to control our master data element and checking whether everybody is using the same elements, we risk that people are applying their own definitions, and then the reported numbers may not mean the same thing to everybody in the organization. So it's important that we define which key master data elements we use, which values we are using, and make sure that it's harmonized, that everybody's using the same key master data elements and values, and that then creates insight. Moving on to the second building block, structure and governance. What we want to do in our reporting processes, we want to create a clear reporting process. We want people to understand what it is that they need to measure and report on. We want people to understand why it is important that these elements are reported and measured. Thirdly, we want people to understand when they're expected to report on these key master data elements and the results. And of course, we also want people to understand how they're expected to report on these key master data elements. So looking at the what. So we want people to understand what it is they need to report on. So it needs to be clear what their process is and what the key drivers are in their process, so that they understand what it is that they need to report on. Secondly, we want people to understand why. So what is the purpose of actually measuring these key master data values in those processes, the key drivers? And if people then understand the purpose, they also need to know when they're expected to report on these key drivers in our main processes. So that means we need to provide them with a clear set of deliverables. So what is it that they need to deliver and by what time? So some of it will be monthly, some of it will be quarterly, half year, annually, exactly when are people expected to report, and even on the day during the closing process when they're expected to deliver. And finally, we need to support our end users on telling them how they need to do that, and for that it's important that we actually document and communicate to them how they're supposed to report on the processes. And those documents then contain the details on the process, the drivers, and the purpose of the process. Deliverables and timelines can be communicated separately, but all of it should be communicated and documented so people have a reference document. If anything changes, we then need to go back at redefining the process and the drivers and go around the circle again, so that all our end users understand exactly what they're expected to report on, by when, and how they're supposed to do it. After having put into place or defined the master data elements and the values that we want to use, as well as the structure and the governance, we then want to make sure that we continue to apply these definitions throughout the process and we don't start deviating. And to obtain that, we want to assign and demand ownership for the process, but not only for the process, but also for the data elements used in the process. So what we do is we need to set targets on measurable values, and that refers to the outcome of the processes. We need to clearly get periodic updates on meeting those targets, and that is a normal thing. That is part of reporting processes where we periodically provide an update on how well we're doing. But not unimportantly, we also need to hold people responsible for controlling the harmonized data. So we want to make sure that we continue to use the values that we've defined at the start of the process, so the key master data elements and the values that we've agreed, because of course we don't want people to start deviating and start applying their own definitions, which may not be in line with the strategy and the ambitions that we have set ourselves. So looking at the process of assigning and demanding ownership. First of all, it's important that we identify a process owner for each of our key processes. And that process owner then gets targets on harmonized key process drivers. So there will be targets on the outcome of these process drivers, but also on which elements or which values we're actually using in that process. We then want the process owner to provide periodic updates on meeting those targets, but also to explain that we're still using only the agreed values and that we do not have any exceptions or deviations from these agreed values. We also hold the process owner responsible for the documentation and the communication around their process. If anything changes, it is the process owner who needs to make sure that all users understand the change in any of the key values that we want to measure and how they are supposed to apply these in the operational processes. So if anything changes, it goes back to the process owner to again go through the cycle, and any changes will be translated in a change of targets and targets on the new identified values. So putting all that together would then provide us with agile reporting solutions, because we have harmonized data definitions that are defined across all our processes. We've defined the key measurements because those are the key harmonized data elements that we want to measure. And we want to make sure that those key measures are present in all our hierarchies. And then our reporting solutions typically inherit these hierarchies from our source systems, making sure that what people are using in the operational processes is also exactly what we report on. So how does that help us? If we're using harmonized values, it means that users are better able to adopt what it is they need to use in their processes. So we've agreed and defined values, and we have embedded those in the processes, so users will be only working with agreed values. Because processes are documented and a process owner is responsible for making sure processes are clarified and documented, it's easier to connect our strategy to our operational processes, because in our strategy we have defined what is important to us, what we want to measure for each and every process, and those data elements are embedded in the processes. So actually you then have a connection between your strategy and your operational processes. Because we've assigned ownership for each and every process, in case we do have a change, we know who to contact and who's responsible for rolling out that change. So that means we can implement changes faster. And that also means that if there is a change to our strategy, we can actually impact our operational processes where it matters, and the strategy change actually has an impact. Now that's all theory. So let's just take a look at some of the examples of, or I've actually included some examples of how we are actually putting that to practice at FrieslandCampina. So if we look at the first topic, harmonization, both on the financial side and for our non-financials, what we've created is a set of harmonized accounts and definitions to be used. So on the financial side, our balance sheet, profit and loss statement, but also specification schedules such as the customer contribution statement, cost of goods sold, overhead specifications, and a number of other schedules are following harmonized definitions and are using harmonized accounts. On the non-financial side, we're actually striving to achieve exactly the same, although it's not financial. But for instance, on the supply chain side, we have harmonized definitions and defined values to be used, for instance, on orders in full and on time, forecast accuracy, market quality incidents. On the corporate social responsibility side, we have harmonized definitions on how to measure energy consumption, wastewater, safety incidents. Those are just a few examples. And on the sales side, that also applies to what values we're using for trade terms and discounts. And I actually have an example later on this. So that's on the harmonization side, and we make sure that that's available to all our end users using one location, one SharePoint, where we're collecting all those harmonized definitions and providing guidelines to our user. So if a user needs to check what values are to be used and what the definitions are for each and every process, and every key process that we're running, they have one location where they can go. Of course, the challenge with a SharePoint like this is that you can either provide not enough data or too much data. So if the rules or the definitions we're providing are too detailed, we also fail to achieve our goal. So, but we do strive to collect all the relevant definitions in one place, so people know where to go to. So that's from the documentation point of view. So looking at our structure and governance, this is a bit of an example of what our structure looks like. So on the left-hand side, SAP is our main source system. We're currently in the middle of a global rollout, so we're not finished yet, but we're well on our way. On top of SAP, we're using SAP BW for operational reports, and for some more insightful operational reports, we use BI tools such as Tableau and Spotfire. For the financials, we're actually transferring the financial information through FDM to our HFM corporate consolidated reporting system, which holds financial and non-financial information. Some of our operating companies are still on their own source files, so we're actually feeding those ERP source files, financials, non-financials, separately through the FDM tool, which is connected to HFM. And we also have some external information that's actually not embedded in our source system. So that's mostly non-financial information which is collected through other databases, and we're actually loading that to our corporate consolidated reporting system through Excel uploads. Now our HFM system has defines how we want to report financially. From our HFM system, we're using standard financial reports, but most of those are for statutory purposes only. For our end users, we provide the SmartView Excel tool to create working files for our financial users to complete their routines during closing and forecasting budgeting cycles. And then we use CXO to create insightful reports. So HFM as a tool is not, in our case, not very good at providing very clear, insightful reports with graphics, drop-down menus, etc. So to that aim, we're using CXO. And the advantage we have with CXO is that the structures that we're applying on our HFM system are inherited or copied over to our CXO system in exactly the same manner. And that means that our financial reporting processes are one-on-one aligned with our corporate reporting structure. So the way that we ask our financial users to report on HFM is exactly the same way that we report out for our corporate reporting using the CXO tool. So let's just take a look at one of the examples, one of the processes that we're actually working with as we speak. So we have a new business requirement which concerns the trade terms that we're using for discounts for our customers. So what we've done and what we're in the process of doing is that we're clearly defining the process itself and the key drivers. We've identified the terms that we want to be using on a customer order, and we've agreed which set of terms we will be using in the future. Currently, we're using close to 300 conditions, and we've brought that down to 122 conditions that we want people to use. So we've clearly identified which terms we want our end users to use. 122 discount terms is still a lot, but it's applying to different markets, different businesses, and every market and business will only use a subset of the 122 conditions. Now we have identified the terms and conditions that we want to use. We've also clarified why we want to use that. The reason why we're actually we've actually selected this subset, or we're actually identifying the exact terms we want to use, is because we want to gain more control over our discounts. We have conditional and unconditional discounts. Unconditional discounts means we're just giving away money. Conditional discounts means we're expecting something in return from our customers. And obviously, we would like to drive more use of conditional discounts. So that's the purpose of controlling this process. We've also clearly defined to our end users what terms they need to use and what specific accounts they need to use, and we've included that in instructions. And the timetable is that we will start the use of these harmonized values and accounts as of January 1st, 2017. So we're well ahead in time, but we want to make sure that the process is clearly understood by all and will effectively be used starting January 2017. To make sure that people still understand by January 2017 what they're expected to do, we've clearly documented the full process. We've created our sales team, who's the owner of this process, has created training material, has gone around and trained all our end users, and the material will also be available on our SharePoint in support of a harmonized process. Once we've applied the new accounts and the new conditions, it will be automatically reported because we use certain accounts on our HFM system, and that also means that we can automatically inherit those new accounts in our cxo-cockpit system. Because we're copying over the structures we're applying on our HFM system, we don't need to do any technical changes, and we do not depend on ICP support to create new reports. This information will just be automatically transferred to our insightful reports on cxo-cockpit. So where we now see just the unconditional discounts and the conditional discounts, we will then have an extended subset of conditional discounts providing us more insight. And all we need to do is just copy over the hierarchy from HFM. And that makes this a very powerful tool because it means we've changed our strategy on the discounts, and we can immediately see the results of that in our corporate reporting tools. So what we want to do is, of course, we would like to assign this to all our key processes and in many cases we've already done that. So what we're striving to do is to create or assign a process owner for all our key processes, whether in sales, supply chain, the various processes in supply chain. Also in finance we have certain various process owners. So we're identifying process owners for all our key processes. We set targets on harmonized process drivers, and we demand definitions of these harmonized process drivers and their values in a PowerPoint format which we can then share in our corporate guidelines on our SharePoint. We also demand periodic updates on meeting those targets, and not just meeting the targets on the process outcomes, but also on the use of the agreed master data values. So we're creating control reports that will provide us insight in which master data elements are actually being used in the processes by our end users. And finally, we document and communicate any of these changes. So we provide training material and documentation on the process itself. And if there are any changes, these are also included in our monthly newsflash updates, informing our end users on any changes on reporting requirements. So how does that then create agile reporting systems for us? It means this way we're able to create meaningful corporate reports that provide insight where it matters. We define a strategy based on our ambitions, and based on our strategy and ambitions we define which key master data values we want to measure. We inform our people what we want to measure, and we inform our people on how they need to run their processes and how they need to include these key master data values in their processes. And that will then create insightful reporting that can in turn be used to either monitor or alter our strategy where needed. So because everything flows from start to end, that creates agile reporting solutions that provide us insight where it matters. So those are the building blocks that we are applying at FrieslandCampina to get to agile reporting solutions, and that will allow us to check if we're still on track with our ambitions. So looking back at the ambitions that we've set ourselves, the 5% annual growth, 10 billion kilograms of milk from member dairy farmers, and growing to 15 billion euro revenue in 2020, we've translated that in a dashboard that allows us to track or to check if we're on track with our ambitions. So in this screen on top you will see that we are registering in our KPI headlines the volumes. Of course there's a revenue as well. Later on this year, because we also want to have to fulfill a longer term ambition of being a sustainable company, later on this year we will also be included the corporate social responsibility KPIs in this same dashboard. Those are typically KPIs that are harder to measure and harder to put in a process, but this year we will make sure that these are embedded in the same process as described, with the same building blocks as described in the earlier slides, and these will then be incorporated in those same KPI or headline KPI reports on cxo. So future state. So currently we're spreading the use of these building blocks in our key processes, but in the end, of course, we would like to apply this end-to-end process control and definition to all processes, apply it to both financial and non-financial data across all of our systems in order to create full alignment of key process definitions across all reporting solutions, which then leads, as explained, to agile reporting, and creating meaningful corporate reports for all our processes and providing insight where it matters. Of course, we are still in the process of it's continuous maintenance, and we're in the process of applying that to all of our processes. There's a lot of processes going on, but right now we've applied it to the key processes that we're running in our company. Ideally, it would apply to any process that we're running in our company. And that brings me to the end of discussing our building blocks, leaving hopefully sufficient time for some questions and answering.
Thank you very much, Wilna. As I said in my introduction, I think what's very impressive and the secret to success of this project together is, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you can have a fantastic tool, but if the data isn't reliable, isn't harmonized, isn't understandable, isn't clean, then that doesn't really matter. And also within discussions that you often hear in finance about, what's that expanded role of finance. I really like this example where you've taken the strength of finance, the methodology, the toolkit, which effectively says, look, I'm able to go from the raw data and get that into a form, into a shape that really creates insight, a shared narrative, a shared perspective on the business that we can really act on. I think it's very powerful, and I think in many projects that we see, that's an ingredient that not everybody has a clear vision on from the start. So I think that's very impressive. So thank you very much again, Wilna. We have noted your questions as promised. Combination of some of the questions you entered before the webinar and now during the webinar. One of the first ones, I must say it's a classic. We get this question a lot, and that's the question: who drives this process within FrieslandCampina? Is it finance? Is it IT? Business?
So for FrieslandCampina, so it's the business that has a need, but it's actually finance driving this. So finance is actually combining all of the information into one big corporate report that they need to share with our CFO. So although the business has a need, it's actually finance that is driving structured processes, because that's the only way we can come to meaningful and insightful reporting that we actually dare to share with our CFO. We want to make sure that what we're reporting actually makes sense and is correct. And in order to do that, you need a very structured process, and that's typically something that finance is able to handle very well. So it's finance driving this in the end. Good.
Thank you very much. And I think, look, that's also a theme we hear a lot from our other customers, also prospects, is that clearly, like Wilna explained, there is a vision. Finance has a certain mission, and clearly has to be in control of its destiny in executing that and guaranteeing the service levels that it's the business expects from finance at the end of the day, not from anybody else. So I think that's that question. The second one. One we also hear, obviously you showed your systems kind of landscape, and one of the questions was, so why haven't you used Tableau or Spotfire for this financial reporting? Can't it do the same?
So Tableau and Spotfire typically are solutions that are more geared into operational reporting. The reason why we're actually applying CXO is that we can inherit, like I said before, the strategies that the hierarchies that we're applying on our financial reporting systems. So those are agreed hierarchies and structures, and we're copying them over one-on-one to CXO. That's just activating the dynamic data hierarchy updates that is available on CXO. If we were to use Tableau and Spotfire, it means we need to rebuild that whole structure on those solutions, and that means a lot of ICT involvement and a lot of work and a lot of maintenance. On CXO, using the dynamic hierarchy updates, any changes you make on HFM are automatically transferred to CXO, and that to us is a big advantage and really provides us with a very low maintenance tool.
Thank you, Wilna. And maybe let's say something, I would also add, let's say philosophically, when you look at the difference between these kind of, operational BI tools and financial reporting, is one of the terms we often use is control, and governance. Many of the BI tools, it's about a democratization of the data. It's in a sense allowing individuals to self-service, create analysis and do their own thing. While we all know that the big challenge when we look at the formal reporting, financial reporting side, is to actually ensure that people do not all show up with their own thing, but we have a kind of common vocabulary, a common narrative, a common story of performance that we share, and that allows us to make decisions, act, understand each other. And I think that's also a point you made very clearly, Wilna. That's the basis you start with, because otherwise conversation, if we're all speaking different languages, using different words which have different meaning to each of us, then it's going to be hard to have a conduct, how do you say it, an efficient conversation in a complex organization.
We lose a lot of time on definitions rather than focusing on the meaning of things and what it is that we need to do to either achieve our strategy, our ambitions, or do things better. So we lose a lot of time on discussing where things are coming from.
Maybe before I continue with the question we already have, we also have a just a new entry just now. By using this approach in its totality, can you tell me what the impact is on your monthly and quarterly closing? Is less time required? And the person entering this question is just an indication. I'm not looking for.
Well, first of all, there are things that we're now able to report on that we couldn't even report on before. So that is gaining more insight. And for those processes that are really well controlled, it does mean a lot less time. In some cases, we gain a number of days. Unfortunately, in our total reporting process, it's not just one element. We have a lot of elements that need to be resolved consecutively. But for the elements where this is really working well, first of all, being able to report on it where we weren't able to report on it before is a big gain. And then the total process of collecting the data is typically reduced to only 1 or 2 days, where normally in a close it would take the full close for everybody to end everything. So yes, there are definitely gains for those processes where we strictly apply this structure.
Okay, thank you very much, Wilna. And indeed, we see this. Look, obviously, like Wilna said, I think she highlighted the two sides very clearly. Clearly, we often see an efficiency gain, a productivity gain at our customers, where just through automation, through efficiency, you can do things quicker. Obviously, it has a big, impact also simply on your ability to make decisions more quickly in an agile, competitive environment. But I think, more importantly, I must say, when we look at the value created at customers, is the first point you made, which is that we're not just faster, and it's not just that we act faster and the information hasn't expired, so to speak. Milk is also a perishable product, and data increasingly is as well. If you don't use it, within a certain time, it's already obsolete. It's really not actionable anymore. But more importantly, is the additional insight you get into your business. And again, I think Wilna very clearly also said that requires also a lot of thought beforehand. It's not the tool that will solve that, but a very clear vision. Okay, so what are those levers, those drivers that get us to our strategy and get us to achieve our ambitions? So I think it was very clear. Another question, who are the end users?
So we started off with rolling out the cxo-cockpit to our top 70. So initially it was only executives that were using the tool. But then we turned around the strategy because actually we wanted to roll out, and that process wasn't really smooth. We didn't get a lot of higher management levels to adopt the tool. So we actually went out to the operating companies and started to involve kind of like lowest level finance people, who then really liked the tool because it was easy for them to use, and then turned around to their executive management telling them what a great tool we had, and now we have the executive managers coming back to us wanting training on the tool. So we actually used two approaches, and we're now seeing that we mainly have users at all levels within finance. We do intend to also extend that to supply chain. So we already have a dashboard on supply chain that we're including in our corporate reporting, but we also would like to get the supply chain themselves to start using cxo-cockpit. Of course, they also have a need for more detailed analysis, more operational, and to that extent they're also using more tools like Tableau and Spotfire. Yeah. So it depends on the level and the purpose you have with the reporting.
And I think that actually also already answered another question, which was how did you drive adoption by end users?
By seducing them and showing
Exactly.
them very nice graphs and very nice, easy-to-use reports, creating their own storyboard. I think one of the biggest advantages that we have is that you're able to create a storyboard and export it to PowerPoint, rather than using all your Excel files that people are creating extensive Excel files and then trying to turn them into PowerPoints. From CXO, one of the big advantages is that you can create your own storyboard and export that to PowerPoint. Once your data is refreshed or complete, you can then easily create a PowerPoint presentation from that.
Good. Now, and I think, let's say, the example Wilna used, we often see different models of how this, how this starts or gets adopted in the company, but I think the two models dominate. Yeah, one is, well, really we see a top-down corporate project where, CFO, CEO from the very start have a vision of, look, we need to work in a different way. We want to get everybody on one sheet. That clearly, as we know from any project and any change management, often helps when you have that very strong mandate. Just as often we see what you just described, Will, is that, to be honest, that there is a vision. Yeah, there's a number of pioneers and a vision that comes out of the finance team that's also looking at its own processes, its ambitions, and also the increasing demands placed on it. Yeah, to provide more information quicker, more effectively. That starts there, and then indeed, in a sense, has to bring its own company along with it and change some habits. Like you said, it's part seducing, top-down, bottom-up. But above all, I think what the example Wilna made, which is very effective, is also just creating concrete cases. I think concrete success stories, concrete champions that then, that it stops being a theory or I think many people have also become very cynical about the latest innovation or latest tool or latest, they've seen so many things come by, so that it's important you create real tangible examples that are credible within the organization, that you can show that it's not just air, it's real. Yeah? And the other thing I would mention is, because it's a question that we also get from some people, okay, is it just finance or also other areas? I think Wilna has demonstrated a key value of what we call strategic performance reporting. We didn't invent this, it was Gartner that pointed this out. And what's different about this is that clearly it remains financially centric. Yeah, all reporting still, the bulk starts with having your finances in order from your EPM system. Yeah, that's still the core, but what we increasingly see is that people wish to have a more integrated, a more complete view. And that means integrating strategically relevant detail within that operational detail, within that, maybe traditionally purely financial reporting. I think that's a very important distinction. So not, just throwing all the data up that you can, and look at financial, non-financials, kind of bottom up. What data do we have? Let's look at everything. But again, the way Wilna described it, very clear vision, or what do we need beyond our financial data to steer our business and achieve our strategy and ambitions, and then in the cherry picking, that those are the data points that will really add value to that core financial reporting that we're used to. And I think again, the supply chain data you showed is a great example, and again, where you also leverage the finance methodology to ensure that you get just as reliable, efficient processes every month, every period, to ensure that the quality of that data is as good as people expect from the core financial data.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, looking at corporate social responsibility, that's a topic, of course, that gets more and more attention. So for us, it's also important to apply structured processes to collecting that information, because that becomes increasingly more important. Another topic that we are facing is, for instance, the nutritional value information. So we need to add that as a company because we are in food, and there is increasing pressure on providing information on how good your food is. So that's something that we're also working on, collecting that information, and then once we've collected everything, also include that in our corporate dashboards.
Good. Well, and as Wilna said, it's a journey. Yeah. And as they say in Italian, the hunger comes eating. So also I've seen that as Wilna has achieved certain, and many of our customers achieve certain milestones, obviously the ambitions also grow along with that. Every time you get something under control, you look at the next phase. So I think it's also very interesting to see not just what is achieved, but also the ambitions to go further. At this point, I think we'll wrap up the webinar. I think sustain everybody's time. I know we're all busy. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your excellent questions. I hope it was useful. For maybe those colleagues that you think might be interested, we will be pushing this up on our website, so you can always go back and review these webinars. And if any other questions pop up, clearly share them with us, and we'll ensure that offline we'll get back to you and answer those. So again, thank you very much, and have a great morning or afternoon depending on where you're logging in from.